You know how, as you're getting ready for retirement, one of the first things most people do is they start thinking about, well, how can I pay off debt, right? That's the big conversation leading into the last year of retirement for most people. You're thinking about, how can I pay down my house? How can I pay off my student loans? How can I pay off this car? How can I uh how can I pay off these credit cards? All valid things, right? But what if I was to tell you, as federal employees, you gotta kind of look at this stuff differently. I'm gonna give you a story. Yesterday, I was talking with a client. She retired 2 weeks ago. She retired at the beginning of August, right? And in her retirement, we were going over a lot of the stuff. She had 670,000 in her TSP, and she had just moved. She had just moved from the DC area, and she moved to the Midwest because she wanted to be closer to her mom. And she sold her house in DC. And when she was moving out there, with the proceeds, she was telling me, she was like, "Well, I got a hefty sum of money, and what I want to do also is I want to take an extra 100,000 and put it down on this house." And I was like, "Okay, you want to take 100,000 out of your TSP?" She's like, "Yeah, because I don't really need the money, so I want to take this 100,000 down." And I said, "Okay, well, how much money will this save you on your mortgage payment?" She was just like, it'll save me about $1,000 a month." And she was very excited about it. She was like, "Yeah, this 100,000, save me 100,000, this 100,000, that put down extra on top of what I'm already putting down will save me $1,000 a month. I'm retired. I figure I just want less bills," which makes sense on the surface. But as I talk about a lot on these webinars, as federal employees, you have to look at your TSP and your investments very differently than people who are in the private sector, because your TSP is your wealth builder. And so what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna walk you through, one, what I told her, and then I'm also show you examples of how it can work with other clients. So here's how it works, right? You have two options. Yes, you can pay down debt. And again, case by case makes sense, right? Yes, you can pay down debt. But another alternative is allowing your investments that you've built up over time, that especially if you're not using your TSP for income, you allow your investments to pay down the debt for you. It's almost like, if any of you in here have read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, he talks about, you want to make your assets pay off your liabilities, right? In a passive way. And so what I'm gonna do is show you exactly what I show her, and I hope y'all can hear me. And so, as federal employees, you got to invest differently, right? And so the thing you hear about on the news, if you watch CNBC, you watch all these different shows, the thing that gets talked about a lot is protection, protection, protection. You got to protect your nest egg. You got to make sure you have your income that lasts the rest of your life. You got to make sure you have long-term care plan and all these type of things. That advice is all well and good if you don't have a pension. But because you have a pension, your TSP, again, is your wealth builder. So you got to think differently than everybody else. And so the way you got to think is like this. Most people just have a 401k, right? Maybe. If you talk to most people in the private sector, they got to have a really, really good job for the most part. But most people you talk to, you interface with, your family members, your neighbors in most cases, your friends that you went to high school and college with. Some of them might not have the same stability that you have, especially if they have no attachment at all to the government, right? So you have these people, they had their 401k, they've been hopping around from job to job. A lot of times in those gaps between jobs, they utilize a lot of that 401k. And so because of that, the main thing that they're banking on is a good Social Security check. That's typically the largest check they're going to get. Then they have their 401k maybe, and they're going to supplement that, the income that they have from their retirement, from their full-time job in retirement, with that 401k. And that's usually barely enough. And so they have two buckets of money that they're getting from, that they're pulling from. And one of those buckets is very, very iffy and leaky. And the 401k, which you see talked about on the news often, is oftentimes the most vulnerable, because that 401k has more than one job. That 401k has to pay income. That 401k has to be there for long-term care. That 401k has to be there for family emergencies. That 401k has to be there for vacations. kids stuff, all types of stuff that 401k is necessary for, right? And the Social Security is the income. Now, when it comes to you all, it's very different. When I'm meeting with federal employees, and I say 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 worst case scenario, you all, for the most part, can live off of your FERS pension and your Social Security if you do the proper planning. And this is why we always tell people, look, meet about your retirement as early as possible, right? I love now how people are getting more and more serious about this stuff. So we're talking to more people in their 40s now than we ever have, early 50s than we ever have. For years and years and years, we were only talking to people in their late 50s, 60s. Nothing wrong with that. That's when a lot of people start thinking about retirement. But the earlier you plan, the better. And the reason why that is because if you plan your retirement well, your bills will be paid by your first pension and your Social Security easily. And what your TSP is now this wealth building tool, and it could be your fund money, right? So as a federal employee, you're going to get those 3 buckets, right? That makes a big difference. And with those 3 buckets, the one thing that separates federal employees that live with a lot of lifestyle versus those that don't is how you invest, right? When you get to retirement, some people apply the same thought process that the media promotes all the time on TV, and it's not wrong. It's just if people have a 401k, they got to be very, very protective over it. And so most people, what they do is they say, Mrs. Smith, I put all my money in the G fund. I just don't want to lose anything. And it all makes sense, right? But the problem is you're losing out to inflation. So here's just 2 examples of people that retire with $500,000, people that have a plan versus people that don't have a plan, a growth plan versus people that don't, right? And so in this case, in example 1, Sarah put 500,000. She puts 80% in the G, 20% in the C. Over a 10-year period, that average growth is out to an extra 140,000. But the thing that you're not accounting for is inflation. And so when you take out what inflation has looked like over the last 10 years, the actual buying power of that money, even though it says 500,000 at the beginning, is now at 470 because inflation eats away when you have the majority of your money in the G fund. Right, because the inflation over the last 100 years was at around 3.27, but then over the last, as you've seen over the last 10 years or so, especially with things like medical costs and things like that, we've seen inflation go 5-6% some years, and so you have to equate for that. Now, when it comes to the other option, is if she invests with the more growth mindset, now CNS fund, that same 500,000 is at 1.2 million in that 10-year period. Now, mind you, she's not using this for income anyway. So it doesn't really matter, right? And so these are some of the things you have to think about when you're planning out your retirement. You want to absolutely have a plan, because if you don't, you're missing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars. So here's a real example. Of course, I blocked out the names and things like that, but I want to show you the power of when you allow your assets to pay for your liabilities. And so this is what I showed the lady the other day when I was talking to her about whether she should take the 100,000 out and save that $1,000 a month, or just invest the asset and take the 1,000 out of the asset and live off the principal, because that's in essence what she did, right? What we talked about her doing, right? And I showed her this example of a real client who had a similar situation, and instead of paying out for house, we said, look, let's just invest. Let's invest what you already have. Let it grow. And then we pay off the principal. We pay down off the interest off the principal to pay for the asset that you have, but you still keep your asset. You don't have a huge tax bill because you're not taking a lump sum of money all out at one time, and your money's growing, right? So here's an example. This is a real example. I don't know if y'all can see this, but this is a client who put 500,000 with us on. This is February 23rd, 2023. See, $500,000 payment. She also took she took 10,000 out. I guess she was just trying to see, look, I got to make sure this money's real. So she took $10,000 out like 2 months later just to test, I guess, us, right? And so she did. But then a year later, she just mentioned to me, she's like, well, I want to, and that was part of the plan. She's like, look, I want to start taking $3,000 a month because I wanted to pay for my mortgage on my new house, right? Now, mind you, you see all these deductions, $3,000. This is every month from July 2024. She increased it a little bit in December 2024. I mean, in February 2025, but she's been taking $3,000 a month every month, right? And now, mind you, when she put the money in, it was at $500,000. I'm gonna look at the balance today. The balance as of today, she's been taking $3,000 a month every month. The balance as of yesterday, or 2 days ago, when I screenshotted this just to see what the value was, 618,000. Her account is up 118,000. Every month she's paying her mortgage off. She didn't have to take that big lump sum of money out to pay the mortgage off. Her asset is growing and it's automatically paying her mortgage. These are strategies that you can take advantage of when you have money set aside. When you're and this is why I always say, whatever you do, put as much as you can into your TSP, because the more you put into your TSP, the better, and the more options you have when you retire. And this is why I always talk about this financial house, because when you have your financial house in place, it allows you to have a growth fund, which allows you to accumulate a lot of wealth and do things like I just showed you, because she also has another 800,000. The lady I just showed, she had another 800,000 in her TSP that's still growing, right? And so she can sleep at night. She knows she's leaving a legacy for her grandkids. God forbid any long-term care situation arises, she's okay. Money's working for her. Okay. And so the reason why we do this house metaphor is because we've been doing this for a long time. And so what we've seen is years and years of what works and what doesn't work. And so when it comes to your foundation is that protected money. That's your pension. Obviously, that's not going anywhere. That's your Social Security. That's not going anywhere. That's your annuities. If you know annuities to supplement your G fund, because your G fund is only going to give you 2%, but has protection. But annuities, especially, are a great product right now, especially with rates being up, because annuities allow you to get between 6 and 8%. That's what she had. She had an annuity. Her annuity in the last 2 years, and that particular company had been doing 15, 16%, and it just varies on how the market does, right? But the good thing is, if the market goes down by 20%, her account balance is protected. Her return for the year would be zero, but she's still making a lot of money based on how the market has returned over the last couple of years, right? And so you get to take advantage of those things. And so you want to have your foundation because you can fit things like that in there. Your walls is where you do your taxes and your inflation protection, and then your roof is where you grow your TSP. And so that's how the financial house works. What I want to also talk to you about too is just this 3 stages of your money. We call it the 3 stages of your money life. Okay. When you're working, you're just accumulating money. When you get close to retirement, you want to start planning. That's probably why you're on this call, right? When you're in your 40s, my conversation with people in their 40s and 30s, maybe 15-minute calls, not much. It's look, put as much as you can away now, right? And if you can't, whatever it is, add 1% to it, and every year after that, add 1 more percent, and just keep doing that. Don't worry about the market. Let it sit, let it grow, and before you know it, you'll be in a good spot, right? That's my conversation with people in their 40s, because it's all about accumulating money at that point. Also making sure you're advancing in your career, not just being stagnant in a position and not going for advancements, right? That's educating yourself, networking, things like that, because all those things play into growing your money. Now, the next thing is, as you're getting close to retirement, you start attending classes like this. You start understanding different tax strategies and things like that, because once you have that lump sums of money and you've accumulated a lot, you got to start planning with it. But the planning is a whole lot easier when you've built up. Then the last piece is, once you retire, it's time to relax. If you've ever met with us one-on-one, one of the things that I love talking about after we talk about the money is like, okay, now what are you going to do? Like, let's dream. What's the dream car you want? Some people, we talk about what's the dream business that you want? How do you want to invest in your grandkids? Just strategic stuff. Because here's the deal. This is what we have to do as a culture over the next 10 years or so, 20 years, because that's just what it demands at this point. It's no longer, I'm just trying to survive. We got to think about how do we build for the next generation? Because a lot of you on this call have that ability if you properly plan, right? And so this is why you have to start looking at your money differently. You have to look at your money as a way of, how do I compound this? How do I live off the principle of this? How do I have investment strategies that reduce my taxes? You have to have those type of questions. You start to ask those type of questions, so you get good answers. There's a guy I like to read. He says, you want to ask the $100,000 question. not a $10,000. I mean, not a $100 question, And so the $10,000 or $100,000 question is tax strategy. For her, that was a $100,000 question. She asked me, should I do it? I showed her a way to kept her $100,000 in her TSP compounding, and then now she could still get the $1,000, no problem. But her TSP is gonna still be rising, right? Saved her $100,000, made her even more, right? So these are the things that you want to pay attention to. The thing I want y'all to take away from this call is you're different. So when you see people on the news and there's a lot of fear involved and things like that, that's for people who the 401k is everything. It has to last to they're in their 90s. It has to pay for their long-term care, has to pay for their family emergencies. So they have to be very, very protective. You as a federal employee, you can tend to take a little bit more risk, grow your money in the market a little bit. Of course, you want to have some protection. You got to be strategic about that. But look at different things, right? And talk to advisors that specialize with federal employees, because it's very different than your typical